Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Jon, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Dan. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, likewise. So we've talked a couple times, and I always like having people on that have the consulting moniker because it can mean a lot of different things, and usually it's like slightly different than agencies. So maybe we'll start there. Like, how do you define yourself as a consultancy versus an agency, or is there any distinction in your mind?
Yeah, well, it depends on the day, I suppose, but we're a marketing and technology firm that strives to deliver Michelin star standards in everything that we do. I know we'll talk more about that later, but we solve complex problems with marketing and technology to unlock growth and drive business results for our clients. We help industrial, healthcare, and e-commerce companies engage in their ideal customers, so helping generate demand, nurture leads, or transform digital systems. Does that give you context on agency versus consultancy a little bit?
It does to some extent. I'm sure we'll dig further into it. I guess before that, would you mind giving us the genesis of Breakthrough and how you started it and so on?
Yeah, sure. I started in 2013 to legitimize some side hustle in grad school, which was the impetus of just making taxes difficult enough that I couldn't be on my dad's TurboTax anymore.
Yeah.
But I still had a full-time gig, and around 2016 was when this became my full-time focus. I had worked for a very venerable agency here in the Twin Cities that was acquired by its largest client and decided to hang my own shingle. And so I got started there, and the rest is history.
That's great. What did it take to kind of go full time with it? Like, I think you said you mentioned like zoning in on industrial healthcare, e-commerce. What was it like in the early days, and how did you kind of get to where you are now? I guess that's sort of a big
Sure.
question, but yeah.
No, I can give you a little bit more color there. So I was able to retain a few of the large accounts that I worked with Breakthrough. At the time, I don't think I had seen Mad Men, like the show, and I didn't realize that it's a kind of a common thing. Like agencies spin out of other agencies. So I was just a ball of stress navigating this. But fortunately, it worked out. I couldn't have planned it better. And I had the support of a bunch of trusted advisors and actually the senior leadership team of the company that I was leaving. But I was a collegiate athlete. So I've always been an advocate of coaching and structure. And for the first few years of running Breakthrough, we were profitable and growing. And I had a small team, but our positioning was still lacking clarity and definition. And that actually led me to engaging an executive coach. And candidly, Dan, I think I had achieved some modest goals and I was doing the thing, but I needed better clarity in myself as the leader. And I wanted better clarity of like where, what were we going to do with this thing called Breakthrough? So and ironically enough, that was 12 months before the pandemic. So the timing was pretty serendipitous, but the first 6 to 9 months were all about setting our one-page strategic plan, which is the same as a vision traction organizer for companies that practice EOS. We practice something called scaling up, but they're very similar. So really setting the vision of where do you want to be in 10 years? What does that look like? And stress testing those core values. And that North Star really hasn't changed all that much, but we want to be the best marketing and technology firm in North America. But even more importantly, we want to be the only Michelin star digital agency in the world. That's not something that exists right now. So those are our big, hairy, audacious goals 10 years out from now. But we started on that system and that structure before the pandemic and have gradually adopted it more and more. It's been effective in helping get the team aligned around our shared vision.
Yeah, there's a lot of different roads I think we can go down there. Definitely want to talk about Michelin star standards. But I think before that, though, talking about this big, hairy, audacious goal, which you mentioned hasn't changed a lot since day one, which is to become number one, I think, marketing and technology firm, definitely ambitious. How did you know you wanted to do that? Like, what was there a moment, and how have you stuck to that?
Well, part of the process is you stress test this stuff at least quarterly, right? And then you take a bigger look at it annually at offsites. But going back to being a collegiate athlete, there's a lot of bests in the agency space, right? Like enter an award here or there. But that's why I emphasize like we want to be the only Michelin star digital agency. I think that is more of a unique opportunity for us. By saying the best, we essentially just want to be that top tier. And that's kind of, I think that probably did the best in North America, probably elevated from the best in the Midwest initially, or the best in Minnesota, then the best in the Midwest, and then the best in the United States. It's still important, but I think it just represents that top tier of consummate professionals known in the community, recognized for our acumen and the results that we deliver for our clients. And actually, part of our 3-year highly achievable goal, Dan, is to create a line out the door of qualified clients and prospective team members that want to come work for us and part of what we're building. So we have fun with it as well.
That makes sense. And is there, a lot of the times, like we use EOS, I'm somewhat familiar with scaling up. Is there a way that you've chosen to make that falsifiable? Like, is that based on a revenue number? Is it a write-up or, a listing in a publication? Or how are you kind of deciding, okay, now we've reached the summit in that way?
Sure. I actually was going to take your question one way, but like right behind me, I have our one-page plan. It's posted in our office so everyone can see it. In terms of when will we know we're there? There is a revenue goal attached to it. I believe for true EOS and scaling up practitioners, it's not supposed to be tied to a number, but we have a number signifying something. Otherwise, we have more qualitative indicators of how we will have gained national notoriety. And Dan, we also practically, we want to make such an argument and a compelling case to the Michelin company to create a Michelin guide for agencies, right? So I think that's a pretty tangible output there that we've got, 9 years to work on.
That's interesting. Or you could start your own Michelin guide for agencies and then make yourselves number one, I guess, which is
build a category or create a community. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess with that in mind, let's start with the growth side, hence the name of our podcast. What are you guys doing to achieve that? Like, what are you investing in to win new clients and to become number one?
I think this actually, Dan, I might ground this back into the core values conversation, but my kind of thesis in our conversation today is that core values really define the culture and positioning of your company, but truly committing to those core values in an infinite amount of ways across your business are what going to drive opportunities and unlock success. That's the short answer and a bit more philosophical to what have we done to achieve growth, but definitely truly committing to our core values along the way. And we've gradually adopted them more and more as we've continued to mature as a business. And we've seen the impact of that.
That's great. And can you talk a little bit about what those are and maybe like how they've reflected the work you're doing now, just on sort of a ground level?
Well, to start, the umbrella Michelin star standards representing the highest level of quality in both the work that we deliver and the level of service that we provide. Collective accountability, empathy, and continuous improvement. Those are our 4 core values. When we first started creating that one-page strategic plan, they were slightly different. So we stress tested them. We had some readings and some homework as a team. We had a couple of working sessions as a group to really they were slightly different. So we stress tested them. We had some readings and some homework as a team. We had a couple of working sessions as a group to really throw those out. And then we needed to make sure that we all understood these in the same way, right? Like context is everything. So those are our 4 core values that guide how we operate today.
That's great. And I think what's interesting about the core values, or I think Amazon calls them principles, is when you hear a negative, like when you hear something that a company has decided to reject, right? And then it could be something that's otherwise agreeable to most people. Like the sort of thing that comes to mind is, I think Amazon or Bezos at one point got questioned about work-life balance. And he was like, nope, it's not in our DNA. You don't come here to have work-life balance. He just threw it out, which was interesting. So I'm wondering, like, a lot of times you hear values and they're all kind of generally agreeable and they're things that like everybody would want to achieve. Is there anything like that? It doesn't have to be work-life balance, but is there anything that you guys have said, you know what, this is good for some agencies, it's not good for us, that might seem normally agreeable?
I have 2 examples, and that's a good question. One, our internal mission, and from day one, it has been to create a sustainable structure of team growth and development that drives business results. So that's me as head of company, but Breakthrough fully acknowledging that we're a professional services firm, right? Like our product is our people, and it's our job to attract, retain, and engage top talent and continuing developing that talent. The second one that could be disagreeable. Our brand promise. We believe that results are table stakes and long-term relationships of trust are the real ROI of partnering with Breakthrough. And when we say that, we're really sticking our neck out there. And that has forced some difficult and uncomfortable conversations and uncomfortable learnings to be had from myself and our team. But it served as our brand promise guarantee, right? Like that is what we are guaranteeing on behalf of our clients. And when we've navigated those, A, we've learned and grown as an organization. And B, it has led to such fruitful relationships of trust when there have been hiccups, which are inherent. They're going to happen. But I would say that that's probably the most quote unquote disagreeable thing that we tout to our clients. It's our brand promise. And that's really our differentiator too.
Right, right. That makes sense. And I think to shift gears maybe slightly, but it's all tied to this. I think one challenge that a lot of our clients have is being able to make that relationship happen to begin with, and then also being able to close deals, especially in this environment. A lot of the times in the agency space, there's not like a wand you can wave and say, hey, you're ready to invest 6, 7, whatever figures in this complex offer. Like you might not need to redo your whole website or brand or whatever it is. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like in your effort to grow, how have you been, managed to stay top of mind with your prospects and get people started, get people like at least over the starting line to work with you?
It's certainly a challenge that we've embraced through a different lens with the economy, but maybe that can be a follow-up question. I think as we've really refined our positioning and doubled down on that brand promise, the biggest change that we've experienced is the amount of due diligence that happens on the front end of those potential relationships
Yeah.
and partnerships to determine if we're a fit. We're clearly positioning ourselves as a premium offering and price as such. And we're also doubling down on that and making sure that it's clear that that's what you should expect from us. But interestingly, I think that actually leads to a more direct and succinct conversation, right? To be clear, many times this isn't a PowerPoint deck, but it's a candid conversation on who we are, what we do, how we help, and the expectations that we have of ourselves and our partners. So we share those core values, we own them, and either members of our community or prospective clients get a feel for how those values guide our interactions. And while that pitch conversation or maybe that qualifying conversation is actually shorter, I think it actually leads to a more controlled pace of the conversation. It's not a fire drill, it's a deliberate, conscious, and human centric approach that we've needed to get comfortable with because it can extend our sales cycles when we are confident that this is the right opportunity or this is the right kind of client. But by having the patience and I guess the foresight to kind of see the forest through the trees there, we're not getting into the low price battle. We're not heavily scoping work only to submit it and learn that there are 4 or 5 other bids. We're really having a partnership level conversation on the front end at the onset of the thing, kind of saying, hey, we're not interested in dating. We're looking for a long-term commitment here. That's been helpful or at least different.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of ways you can overtly and then kind of more subtly communicate that in your offer in terms of the questions you're asking, in terms of asking harder questions and also figuring out like what needs to happen so you can actually figure out whether or not you're going to be successful. And people can read that very clearly over people that are just being vague in their sales process. But to get a little bit more specific or tactical, you've sort of talked about, intentionally perhaps elongating the sales process in order to find fit, kind of aiming for quality. Can you talk about the who question a little bit? Like, what is your philosophy in terms of your own involvement in the new business process? Are you the person leading that? If not, then can you talk a little bit about your new business team and how you see that panning out, over the next years?
I will. I'm going to transition this into the current question of like how we're doing this in today's economy. But yeah, up until 18 months ago, like I was the chief sales officer. And what do you know? A learning, and you gotta have trusted advisors that aren't afraid to tell you the honest truth that like you can't be the chief sales officer and the chief executive officer indefinitely, right? It's not a competency issue, it's a capacity issue. So I'm still very involved in the sales process, but I've learned that I can be even more influential and impactful representing as the head of the company, right? And being the trusted source of someone to escalate, but also say, or this is what you should expect of us. If you ever have any questions, here's my personal cell. One KPI that I have as head of company is to touch base with every one of our clients. And we have less than 20 to be clear, but to touch base with those clients quarterly. And I have 3 basic questions like, are we delivering on our brand promise? Is there anything that we should start doing and anything that we should stop doing? I think the shortest conversation I've had with a client was like 5 minutes, and the longest was like an hour and a half.
Mhm.
Right. But the point is that we do care, that I am listening, and I'm here representing as head of the company. In terms of how we're pursuing new business in this economy. Is it okay if we kind of start talking about this, Dan?
Yes, and then I want to circle back to things you just talked about, but let's go there.
So I think I report out on business performance quarterly to our entire company, and that's a common EOS traction or scaling up thing. But it's really important to have systems and mechanisms in place to understand how your business is performing and how you're being impacted by the economy, right? So there's reports of weekly, monthly, quarterly, like business reports. But beyond reports, like I'm frequently engaging with other business leaders, agency owners, and advisors to get additional perspective, what I might be experiencing or seeing at Breakthrough, what our clients might be experiencing, what other pockets of the economy, and kind of benchmarking in that sense to understand what's happening. Is it isolated to certain pockets? And beginning to collaborate on like how to navigate in addition to just being supported. But for us, we really set ambitious growth goals for the year and largely staffed up accordingly. And I just reported out on the second quarter. We closed out the second quarter. I shared that to the team 2 weeks ago, and we learned we were below our ambitious top line revenue goal. I kind of use the analogy that we're still in the race, but we certainly fell off pace. And one big learning was that our pipeline year over year has different needs. I could look at our pipeline the last like 3 months, and if it was last year, I would have full confidence that like, yep, we're going to hit our goal. This is going to happen. And what do you know? Fool me once, fool me twice. Maybe I got fooled 3 times, but our pipeline was diverse. And it was a mix of retainers and projects and net new and expansions. And all that's great. But we're realizing that our pipeline needs are different, right? This whole notion of extended decision-making cycles is very real. Our clients are experiencing it. We're now experiencing it. So we're realizing like, hey, we need to explore bolstering our biz dev team and our capabilities, right? What cut it last year or what we've normally been comfortable with isn't necessarily cutting it right now if we want to continue to perform to the goals that we've set. We're also revisiting our internal marketing efforts with an emphasis on inbound and sales enablement. Dan, you've heard of like revenue attribution, right?
Mhm.
I've got a hot take for you. Opportunity attribution.
Say more.
It's worth what you paid for it. But when we've had opportunities, our marketing approach is really human centric, but we're really working to understand where those opportunities have came from and understanding those activities. If it is attending a gala or an award ceremony or a podcast like this, just understanding what are the things that we can do that are kind of behind the scenes and building our brand awareness in front of the right people. So we're really refining that. And then the third big thing that we're doing is leaning into our referral partners and those sources of influence and ensuring that we are staying top of mind while things are sort of taking a lot longer. And we're still getting a lot of hesitancy from our clients to invest in any capital expenditures.
Let's face it, building proposals is a pain for most agencies. It drains your time and energy, and the fear of putting in all that effort only to be ghosted by prospects is real. But what if I told you there's a better way? Introducing Smart Pricing Table, the game-changing interactive proposal software designed specifically for agencies like yours. Developed by a former agency owner, their powerful tool cuts down on the back and forth, incorporates upsells seamlessly, and lets you build proposals at lightning speed. No more grinding it out and leaving money on the table. It's time to create a repeatable system where your prospects can upsell themselves. Learn more at smartpricingtable.com/DAG and schedule a demo today.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously something in the water, and that's clearly going on. You have to be crazy to think it's not. At the same time, I think it's easy to blame things on the economy that may have nothing to do with it, especially when we're dealing with small sample sizes and we're not the
Yeah.
biggest companies on earth and so on and so forth. So to ask you a hard question, I guess, how do you differentiate? How do you figure out what's a mistake we might have made, what's something else for whatever factor versus what's macro, and how do you decide what to do based on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that stance. I think it is. You're right. When I reported out to the team, we're certainly feeling some sentiment of the economy, but by no means are we abdicating our own responsibility, right? The things I just rattled off to you were like, cool. In light of all this, how are we going to respond? Continuous improvement is a core value. We also rolled out one of our team members is a member of the military. And we also rolled out a thing called an AAR, an after action report. And that's just a formally informal way to kind of do a postmortem on, hey, what did we expect to happen? What happened? What could we have done differently? What could we be better prepared for? So we're always open to feedback and improvement opportunities. We're not going to sit here and be blaming the economy for why our business is soft. We're also really mindful of where we're spending our time and effort. That's why we're refocusing our marketing efforts. There was one vertical that we had piloted being more like focused in. This year, we attended two trade shows, had developed some case studies, had proven results with a very venerable brand in that space, and got to the halfway point of the year and said, hey, we're going to pull the ripcord on this. We've invested a lot of time and effort, candidly, a lot of sunk costs, but we have enough of a sample size of the appetite for this vertical to engage in our services based on how that industry is performing as a whole, that like we needed to pull out and go explore something else.
Yeah, and it is kind of a sidebar. Every time I get exposed to like a military analogy that works in business, it's always like so concise and golden. After action report. Another
Yeah.
one, I was on a call with somebody and they said, I don't know which branch of the military it comes from, but two is one and one is none. Have you heard that one?
No, but
Yeah, it's
I'll coin it. I'll take credit for this afternoon.
might as well. I am. It's based on the concept of redundancy, right? If you have two of something, you have one of them. If you have one of something, you have no backup.
Sure.
So you've got essentially nothing, which is great when you're thinking about team, who's doing what and everything like that, which is super interesting. That all makes sense. And I'm sure we could talk a lot more about the economy. I think one thing you said earlier in terms of checking on clients, I love that 3-question framework. Are we delivering on our brand promise? Is there anything we should stop doing? Is there anything we should start doing? Are there any stories there? Have clients ever said things to you that you found to be surprising or that have changed your course?
Yes, I will say that we talked about mine. Like, so I started my agency career as an account lead, right? That's where I'm most comfortable. And on a personal note, like as head of company, like my role has changed so dramatically in the last 2 to 3 years. Sometimes it can feel, an agency owner's knows it can feel very lonely and isolating and stressful. And what do you know, Dan? A KPI that requires me to call and check in with our clients feels really, really familiar. It's been refreshing, and it's allowed me to stay in contact with those key clients and foster a relationship in a different way, shape, and form, right? As head of the company, I don't get to check on them as much. It's been a great opportunity for me in understanding how my role today how I can still leverage that ability that I have. So that's been a learning on just me as like, what do I need as a CEO to be performing well? And I think that's a great opportunity to remain connecting with clients. Other big learnings, I can't say that we've been too surprised, which is probably a good thing. I'm always checking in, on the account team with the account team before calling a client. So I'm not completely blindsided, and the clients are aware that I'm going to call them and check in on them. And in a way, I think it's more we're delivering on our brand promise by being there and having the call and being there to listen, because if anything were to happen, or if I did need to be aware of something, I'm there.
Right.
I will say that we've engaged, I signed the contract this week. We've engaged a third party market research firm to actually conduct in-depth interviews with our clients, to be removed from the equation, to better understand our positioning in the space, what they think of our brand promise and value proposition, to really get those insights on how we could be better partners for them, and also understand where our offering and our value proposition falls in all the other agencies, or where we fall in terms of their mind share as well.
Right. That's interesting. And just to dig into the client check-ins a little bit, what's your
Yeah.
cadence for that? Like how often are you looking to connect with clients?
Once a quarter.
And I think one thing that we see with our clients, and we definitely deal with this ourselves, is just kind of dealing with incomplete information from the team. And then also, I think one thing that I always think about is like, how do I help this client without interfering with stuff the team already has in motion, or stuff they've already dealt with or whatever. So how do you deal with that? Like what's the sort of like representation you're making to the client about the sort of problem you can help with versus one that is better for the team, so that you don't inject yourself into being a
Sure.
bottleneck? Yeah.
Great question. I fell a little bit out of sync on, this is a thing that I'm aiming to do weekly, and I have time on my calendar. And I fell a little bit out of sync, right? I wasn't keeping myself accountable, and I didn't have visibility to my senior leadership team. But within the past month, I picked back up and kind of did some catch up. So one, I'm communicating that with my team. Like, hey, FYI, I'm calling on these clients. Let me know. The second thing I've started doing is I always took notes, but now I'm taking, and it's requiring more time, but I also realize it's a very good use of time. I'm distilling my notes with like key feedback and then sharing that back with the team rather than just dumping a laundry list of notes or no notes at all. I'm making sure there is closed loops. I also am representing head a company. And I think coming in with just those three core questions, it helps the clients or the people on the other end of the phone know that I'm welcome to talk as long as they'd like, but I'm not here asking for 45 minutes of their time, right? It's high level feedback. If there's things I should be aware of, great. If not, I think helping set expectations at the beginning of that call has been really helpful. But I don't have day-to-day context, and I've lived both sides of that coin, Dan. Like I have
Yeah.
had just enough information to be dangerous and maybe confuse something a little bit. But for the most part, I think myself and the clients that we're connecting with are aware of my role and where I can help.
Right. That makes sense. And it's definitely a great framework. I think one thing we've talked about in the past was, and I might have this wrong, but I think you guys were interested in building a scalable product around what you do. Assuming
Yeah.
that's something still in motion, or if it's not, that's a story in itself. But how is that going, and how do you feel about scalability in this agency world of ours?
Yeah. So building a scalable tech product is something on our 3-year roadmap, the same roadmap that talks about a line out the door of qualified candidates and prospective clients that want to work with us. In terms of timing and sequencing, where I envision that happening is we have a couple of very talented interns right now, actually 3 of them, but we're flirting with about 30 people in terms of like total headcount, including them. We are really focusing on efficiency and staying lean, especially in the economy right now. But getting to about 35 to 40 people is where we intend to be in about 3 years. And at that size, that's about a 6 to 8 person tech team. That'll allow us enough capital to be able to deploy that tech team to be building that product and like basically having an in-house R&D team. So it's on our roadmap. It's something that we're planning for. I think we're still working on being humming as a professional services firm and as an agency and getting to that kind of critical mass where we can deploy resources specifically to that. I think we have a rock kind of in a parking lot. It's probably a quarter or two out. So 3 to 6 months out of deploying like a proof of concept of what that product might be. Part of it is like it's on the roadmap. It's something that you're kind of aware of and you're always looking at least quarterly. Our current notion, like if you were asking me what would that product be about today, is probably something related to data normalization in the healthcare space, which is a really big and beefy problem that consultants get paid a lot of money over a long amount of time to clean up data. So if we can deploy a scalable tech product in a vertical like healthcare and helping solve a problem like data normalization, there's certainly the opportunity to pivot from a professional services firm to a professional services firm that's also balanced with, a product as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And to keep kind of bouncing around, it sounds like you hold your values in high esteem, and it's something that's kind of guided a lot of what you do. But it sounds like maybe those weren't set in stone and they've evolved. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how do you think agencies should approach their values as specific as possible? Like, what are the sorts of signals or lessons that have caused you to change them, if any?
Yeah. So I think one, value shouldn't come from the top down. They need to be derived from the team. And as a leader, you need to fully enroll your team and ensure that they're invested and that their feedback matters. It's a challenge. It is a challenge that forces people to think differently, to do something outside of their day to day. The most challenging thing you're going to do working on your core values is just dedicating time to work on them. The production or the delivery team, when they're grinding through tasks, you can't just put 30 minutes and say like, hey, I'm going to completely do a mental switch and be in a completely different headspace. It's going to require a lot of communication and more communication and change management, but it's worth it. So I think reinstating the purpose of why you're doing that exercise, ensuring that you have adequate communication and space to kind of reflect and working sessions to determine what they are. And then once you've started generating like phrases or some form of commonality, you need to define that even further. You need to have the working sessions or the conversations to understand like, no, at Breakthrough, when we say Michelin star standards, it means this. We have that documented and defined, right? It's sort of like, here's your short definition, here's your long definition, and here's an example of that in action. We weekly highlight people in our all hands meeting. We have a Crush It crew. It's a little team member recognition program where we highlight other individuals on our team that were demonstrating our core values, which is constantly reinforcing what they are and what they mean.
Yeah, I think that that was kind of key for us. We always did these assessments and then they would kind of get stashed away and then looked at 90 days later versus setting up a cadence and then twining them in everyday life. It's really important. So I think that's a good point. So John, this has been a lot of fun. I guess is there anything you want to plug? Where can people go to find out what you're up to?
Well, if any of our listeners would be interested in experiencing what working with a Michelin star marketing and technology firm is like, or have a complex problem they'd like to solve, they can find us at breakthrough.com. Outside of that, I would love to connect on LinkedIn to chat, stress test anything I shared today, or just connect in general. Happy to spar over core values, our business maturity, or anything else we covered on this podcast.
Awesome. We'll get that linked up. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dan.